All right, so we'll call this meeting of the Board of Directors Monterey One Water to order, please. Roll call.
Rhonda,
Here.
Castroville,
Here.
County of Monterey, Delray Oaks,
Here.
Marina Coast,
Here.
Monterey,
Here.
Pacific Grove, Salinas,
Here.
Fan City,
Here.
Seaside.
Here. All right, thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I wonder if I might ask our newest member, Mr. Ragsdale Cronin, to lead us in the pledge, please, sir.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ragsdale Cronin.
you.
We get to additions to the agenda. Staff, are there any emergency items we need to add? All right, then we go on to agenda item 5, approval of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion.
Second.
A motion and a second. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on the item? And if you're coming in by Zoom, you raise your Zoom hand. Seeing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Please show unanimous approval of the agenda. Go to agenda item 6, public comment. Anyone wishing to address the board on matters that do not appear on today's agenda may do so now for not more than 3 minutes. Comments, of course, on any other matter listed on the agenda are welcome at the time the matter is being considered by the board. And if you're on Zoom, raise your Zoom hand if you have a comment for an item not on the agenda. All right, seeing none in the audience and none on Zoom, we'll get to our introduction of a new representative from the city of Delray Oaks, Mr. Bill Ragsdale Cronin.
Thank you.
Any opening comments to say
I'm just
hello?
looking forward to being on this side of the table for a while. Spent a lot of time on the other side.
You did indeed spend a few years,
38,
only 38.
almost 39,
Okay.
just shy of 39.
So how did you do that when you're only 42?
Yeah, I age well.
Okay,
I age real well.
very good.
Thank you.
So welcome to the board, and we look forward to working with you, sir. We get to agenda item 8A, and that is to potentially adopt resolution 2024-01, the very first resolution of this year, which is a resolution of appreciation for Scott Donaldson for his service on the Monterey One Water Board representing the city of Delray Oaks from January 2021 to December 2023. I'll entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on the motion? All right, seeing and hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Provide comment.
Oh, sorry. Yes, absolutely. I was going to give you some time for comment. Just wanted to make sure the motion was approved. So, please.
Just want to take a moment to thank Mayor Donaldson. I met Mayor Donaldson last year in January and really appreciated his immediate desire to work together. Coming from Delray Oaks and particularly with the issues of the city of Salinas, sometimes you could call us apples and tennis rackets, but it's absolutely refreshing to have somebody working so collaboratively across Highway 68, and I thank you for your service to this board.
Vice Chair Williamson.
I'll just echo a lot of what Board Member Craig has just shared, and speaking frankly about it, particularly around all the through the election process and the assumptions that were being made about you. Serving with you on this board has proven very much the opposite of that, and so it's been nothing but an honor to serve with you and get to know you better, and just appreciate your service to Monterey One Water.
Any other board member comments?
I have comments.
Yes.
I want to echo both sentiments that have been relayed today. One of the first things I remember about you sitting on this board was you coming over and, extending your hand and making yourself available. And I think that shows a lot. And the way you carried yourself here in a collaborative manner speaks volumes as well. So thank you so much for this past year that I've served with you.
Yes, I'd
Yes.
like to also just give you thanks for your service to this board, and it's been a pleasure working alongside with you, Scott.
Director Church.
Yes, Scott also just wanted to express, thank for being my neighbor next to me. at the meetings. I feel sort of isolated now without you here, at least for this meeting. But anyway, it's been good to work with you. Hopefully there's a future still onto that somewhere.
We're on other boards.
Yeah, that's right.
Director Herbino and then Director
I would like to echo the same things. I've always found you as being such a friendly, open guy right when I got on this board, and I really appreciated that. Your comments are always very on point and very rational. And I think you're going to do some great things in the future.
Yeah, much appreciated, Scott, having you sitting over here on our side. Yes. And you always got your arms around the big picture and look for the solutions rather than heading into the battle. So appreciate that.
And of course, we're doing nothing but giving new director an idea of big shoes to fill, right?
Yeah, I just hope I can do as half a good a job as Scott has done.
Sure you will.
Looking forward to working hard. Scott's done some wonderful stuff, both for the city of Delray Oaks and for Monterey One. Appreciate it, Scott.
And Scott, as you know, both you and I have shared a fair amount of time in the military, and we know that military leaders typically have a fairly full plate of things. So I was particularly impressed when, as a new mayor, you decided to also take on this additional role. But I can certainly, you can certainly be forgiven for trying to find a little more time to focus on your mayoral duties. So we do absolutely appreciate the time you spent with us, and I was fairly confident you would do a good job when you came, but thank you for doing so. All right. So we have a motion that I would like to read into the record, if you all don't mind. It's Resolution 2024-01, a resolution of appreciation to Scott Donaldson from the Board of Directors, Monterey One Water. Whereas Monterey One Water acknowledges the service of Director Donaldson has rendered representing the city of Delray Oaks on the Monterey One Water Board of Directors from January 2021 to December 2023. And whereas Director Donaldson served on the Projects and Planning Committee from April 2021 through March 2022, and on the Monterey Microgrid and Renewable Energy Project Ad Hoc Committee from February 2022, when it was established, I believe, through December 2023. And whereas Director Donaldson served as an alternate on the Budget and Personnel Committee from April 2022 through November 2023, and as an alternate on the Recycled Water Committee from April 2022 through March 2023. And whereas Director Donaldson used his broad military experience for analyzing large and complex projects so that all angles of the topic were discussed and voted upon to benefit all Monterey One Water customers. And whereas all Monterey One Water member entities benefited from Director Donaldson's dedicated and distinguished service in providing cooperative water solutions for our area. So now, therefore, be it resolved that Monterey One Water hereby commends and extends public recognition and appreciation to Director Donaldson for his service to Monterey One Water and the communities it serves, passed and adopted by the Board of Directors of Monterey One Water, January 29th, 2024. Would you like to come up?
Yes.
Thank you.
Public comment, you have 3 minutes.
You want to maybe, here, let me just, I'll step up here. No, I'll just tell you, it was an honor and privilege to serve with all my fellow board members. We took on a lot of complex and controversial issues and projects, and we throughout that whole process, treated each other with dignity and respect and maintained a sense of decorum in some pretty tough discussions. And I just really, really appreciate that. And I appreciate the friendship that I have with my fellow board members. So thank you so much for that. To the staff, just an incredible assemblage of talent. It's some of the best I've seen, and I could speak forever about the accomplishments that you guys have made and contributed to this organization. I would like to talk about two people very quickly because I spent really the majority of my time with them. The first is Chai. Thank you so much for giving me all the information I needed to do my job as a board member, keeping me informed, and just being so kind. I really appreciate it. And I know Paul's not here, but you know, the success of this organization, his ability to take intent and guidance from this board and turn it into action was just outstanding. And the success that we see in this organization is directly attributed to what Paul has done. So I'm very appreciative of that. Bill, we're in good hands with him being here, as you guys have said. Many years in Monterey One Water, and I know that he'll represent Delray Oaks and in this organization extremely well. And you know, it's just been a blessing being part of this board and getting to know all of you. And I won't say goodbye because I know I'll see you at other meetings and other gatherings, but I'll just say I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. You don't have to stay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we now go on to agenda item 9, which is a presentation on water supply. Mr. David Stolt, please. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. That was very nice. That concludes the dignity and respect portion of tonight. The districts here. Great. Shai, is it ready to go? I can advance these myself. So I was asked to come here. This is all on an informational basis, a little bit about the cease and desist order, how we got here, what it's going to take to remove it, and the moratorium on setting of new meters and so forth. So I will be happy to take any questions at the end. All right, who wants to bail me out? Is there an on switch?
Ah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
So I'm not doing it.
We'll do it.
Okay. Thanks, Chai. So this is what the watershed and the groundwater system looked like pre-Pure Water Monterey. About 2/3 of the potable water, drinking water, came from the bottom portion, which is the Carmel River Basin with all of its tributaries and streams, and about 1/3 from the upper kidney-shaped blue area, which is the Seaside Groundwater Basin. Since the advent of Pure Water Monterey, it's now about 38% from pure water, 35% from the river, 30-ish, a little bit less from the Seaside Basin. And then you've also got Sand City desal and some other sources available to you. Next slide. But just a quick look back, we didn't used to treat the river with kind of the respect and the care and feeding that we do today. This one's a little difficult to see, but this is from the 1940s. A steam-driven bulldozer used to just clear the stream banks, and that's how we treated the river. Next slide. And this is in the 80s, and you can see how expansive and gravel covered the stream bed was. And what you see right there is a concrete foundation with a wellhead in it. And when the time came, they would pop the top off the metal that you see down in the corner put a pump on it and start pumping out of the river. And you can see the stress that basically the river was affected with from as far down as the lagoon all the way up to what we call the Narrows, up in Garland Park and beyond. Next slide. Similarly, you can see from, I believe this is in the 90s, 1998. This is near Carmel Valley Ranch on the top. And then the restored stream bed in the 2000s on the bottom. And you can see the same escarpment right in the middle of the slide, little tan area. So it's really basically the same photo a decade apart after a restoration project. Next slide. We used to think that tires and old cars and handmade jacks similar to what you would see on the beach of Normandy during the invasion was the best way to protect the river. Again, this is the same view later in the early 2000s after restoration. And this is right near what's called the Songbird Preserve. If you were out hiking along the Carmel River or crossing at the Schulte Bridge. All of this together, next slide. All of this together is just a summary of the way the river was responding to overpumping through the years. And in the late 80s and early 90s, 4 local, call them non-governmental organizations or public interest groups banded together. Or let's consider it didn't band together, the state kind of put them all together. The Carmel River Steelhead Association, the Residents Water Committee, which was a kind of an offshoot of the Carmel Valley Association, the Sierra Club, and the California Department of Parks and Rec all made inquiries to the State Water Board about those conditions that you could see on the river, saying, hey, I think it might be overpumped. So the state weighed in, and it was at this time that the state made a determination that it was all surface water flowing in a known and definite channel underground. And why was that important? State Water Board didn't have any rights to govern groundwater. That didn't happen until Sigma in 2017. So the first step they made was that all the water that was being taken out of wells was actually surface water flowing underground. That way they could regulate it. So they passed Order 9510. This is the very first time they showed interest. Those cases or the inquiries had started in the late 80s and took them until 1995 to act on it. Next slide. And that was the first of many. At the time or the year before the order, there was about almost 13,000 acre feet per year coming out of the river. And the state made a determination that the legal right that California American Water had was actually 3,376. And that 3,376 you probably heard on more than one occasion. But it was in Order 9510 that the state said you need to get down to your legal limit. And you might legalize your withdrawals by participating in the new dam that the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District is going to build beginning this year, 1995. A couple months later, the voters turned it down, so we didn't have that alternative. 14 years passed, the state finally said, didn't we tell you in 1995 to get down to your legal limit? It doesn't look like anything's happened, so here's a cease and desist order for you and the community. And that's where we stood at that time with a requirement to get off the river or get down to that 3,376 by December 31st of 2016. It also said no new service, no additional water to serve new service connections. And that had to be formalized through an application to the Public Utilities Commission that resulted in the moratorium on the setting of new meters. That was 2011. The regional desalination project went down in flames in 2011. And it was in April of 2012 that about 40 of us got together, anywhere from city managers to local activists, California American, and some water professionals sat in a room up at the old convention center by the Portola. And California American said, well, we're going to go it alone. We're dropping out of the regional desal project and we're going to promote a desalination project. How do you feel about that? And Keith Israel raised his hand. He said, well, for years, I've been trying to get a groundwater replenishment project moving forward. Kind of said, you stiffed us last time because it was only done at a programmatic level in the EIR. And it was agreed at that time that if the public agencies could get their act together and put together a water recycling project, that yes, it would be considered as part of the project. And so it was the alternative, the variant to the full 9.6 million gallon per day desalination plant proposal. And they said, if you can get your project moving, we'll drop it to 6.4 million gallons per day. So as we moved forward on that application, then there were some issues about the desal plants, EIR, the slant wells, and a variety of things that changed the whole schedule. And Pure Water Monterey was ready to go in 2016, and the desal plant wasn't. And about that time, we said, oh, we're going to need to extend that cease and desist order. So the mayors who had a working authority at the time on water issues, our district and CalAm got together, and we made a proposal to extend the cease and desist order. It was accepted in July of 16. About the same time, Pure Water was approved by the Public Utilities Commission to move forward with the first water purchase agreement. And we got to defer the CDO to December 31st, 2023, where we sit today, where the CDO exists. Water coming from the Carmel River is now down at or below 3,376 acre feet per year. And the only way we could have gotten there was the Pure Water Monterey based project. Next slide. So what will it take to lift the cease and desist order and then ultimately the moratorium? It is a 3-step process. And the way it's written, come on in, Dave. The way it's written is in the cease and desist order itself, it says CalAm must certify that a permanent supply has been substituted for the unlawful diversions from the Carmel River. Begs the question, what happens if CalAm doesn't submit certification? Well, one of the things we've learned through time is we are an aggrieved party at the district. Any aggrieved party can file. And so if CalAm doesn't participate with us, then we will file by ourselves. And then what happens once that process is started, the deputy director for water rights must concur in writing. Now, they've already said, we've met with them on a variety of occasions. They've said, well, we probably won't just do that. We'll probably have a workshop. Might not rise to the level of a hearing, but certainly the board will want to know, what is this evidence? How can you project that you have sufficient substitution and so forth? And the big question there is, how long will the state board process take? We just don't know. That's why we will start early. Then to get the moratorium lifted, that's simply that the company must file a tier 1 advice letter. These are relatively easy to do. They're subject to a 30-day review, and if there's no controversy, then they're automatically approved. So the big step is lifting of the CDO. The little step is lifting of the moratorium. Next slide, Shai. This one's a little difficult to read, but it begs the question, well, what is the substitute supply? And that means to us, it's not just enough water to say, hey, we're off the river, we can meet our legal right. You must have enough water for a reasonable amount of growth over a reasonable amount of time. In other words, you don't want to be back in the principal's office in short order, pulling more water than that 3,376. So we look to what water supplies we have, and we have water supplies that are not subject to drought, don't really vary year in, year out. You'll find it interesting, the river, we can go through a 4-year drought, but you get one good rainfall, it'll be deemed a dry year or a critically dry year. But very likely the entire aquifer has refilled in that one period of rain. We do know for sure that in all water year categories other than dry and critically dry, the aquifer fills up to beyond 95% every year. The Seaside Basin, there's a desire to do an in lieu recharge program or fallow it, only take from it about 774 acre feet per year, leaving 700 in the ground that could be pumped. There are reasons that will show you that maybe that's not necessary. Aquifer storage and Pure Water Monterey. And then there are a couple of little small things called Malpaso, which is a water right that Clint Eastwood monetized and sold and made available. And then we have some water wheeled by others. Don Orozco, who was a developer here, had rights to water that he purchased from a sand company. The McIntosh family still does own the land under the Laguna Seca Golf Ranch. So there are individual pumpers who've made some of their water available for other uses, primarily Montage and the Ascent apartment that's just being built right now in Seaside. Then we have supplies that are actually affected by drought. And I would include Pure Water Monterey expansion in that because of the source waters being different than the base project. Paul, who's celebrating his wife's birthday, just submitted testimony a week ago. It shows in a dry year. So when the SRDF, the diversion facility on the river, is down, the project's going to need to borrow about 345 acre feet. And then in most years, if not all years, the base project can return another 200 acre feet during the winter months, the shoulder months and winter months when the CSIP demands are lower. So net in a dry year, you're likely to see 145 acre foot shortfall. Not always, but we're kind of seeding that territory to say, yeah, when the SRDF is down, let's assume 145 acre feet of shortfall on the expansion. Aquifer storage and recovery, number's actually wrong here. The 1,210 is the average yield, but in a dry year it's 0, and in a wet year it can be 2,800 acre feet, so it's a big span. And then Sand City desal, we've seen some problems with when there's not enough native water, meaning it hasn't rained for a while, then the quality of water going through is higher in salt, and so the discharge permit requirements cannot be met. So it's not so much a shortage of source water, it's an inability to meet the discharge. Next slide. So then you have to consider where are we today? How much water do we use? This is water demand here on the Monterey Peninsula for 20 years, last 20 years. And you can see the last 9 are relatively flat, with last year being down, but I think it'll come back. It was a very wet year, so irrigation demands were down. The other thing to note, next slide, is this red arrow. That's when the desal plant was sized. And you can see we're now, if you count last year, we're about 3,000 acre feet below when the desal plant was sized. And on average, we're about 2,500 acre feet below where the desal plant was sized. And it was sized by looking backwards 5 years. And you look at the slope of the line prior to that red arrow, and we're just in a different world, different environment. Next slide. So how do we look at this? How do you confirm that there is sufficient supply, that we've substituted and the cease and desist order should be lifted? One of the approaches is a water supply scenario analysis, where you take all your supply, compare it to demand, and you say, is there enough? And in doing so, what we did is we took 59 years of actual hydrologic data from the river. It's data that the CalAm actually produced in a report, so we decided to use their data rather than our data. We start in a 5-year drought. So we take those 59 years and we found a 5-year drought in the late 80s, early 90s. So we start in the late 80s, early 90s, and then tack on the years ahead of that at the tail end. We assume certain constraints on ASR that CalAm themselves have testified that they believe there are these constraints. We assume that 145 acre foot of borrowing for the expansion during dry years. And we start with what's currently in the ground at just over 2,100 acre feet. And then we say on the demand side, well, how fast are we going to grow? We've taken the AMBAG, the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, regional growth forecast, which they adopted in 2022. And they forecast population, they forecast job growth. So we take population and we apply those growth rates actually by individual cities, your individual cities, because they're different. We take that population growth rate and we apply it to production for customer service for the residential sector. And then we take the job growth rate from AMBAG and we apply that to the non-residential water use. And we project it out over their 25-year forecast cycle. And we say, okay, that'll be our average growth rate in those two areas. Add them together, that's your demand. Next slide. So you're going to want to use your monitors here, but what's the expected outcome look like using those assumptions? The green line is total available water in any 1 year. And what you see is the impacts of storage. So the blue line is water available from those projects, both drought proof and drought dependent in any single year. The yellow line is demand, and it looks flat, but it's actually growing. But water that's unutilized in any particular year is then added to the storage in the ground. And what you see is you're accumulating storage over time in this 59-year cycle. So much so that in the 30th year, you have more water than you know what to do with. Next slide. Well, we said, wait a minute. You know, there's a lot of people who aren't going to believe the AMBAG growth forecast, whatever. A lot of people say, oh, ASR is not reliable, even in drought. Okay. So we took ASR and we said, let's put a further constraint on it, one that CalAm shows in their data of 13.3 acre feet per day if the weather permits. And then we said, let's assume there's just some other constraint every year, and they can only do 75% of that. So just under 10 acre feet per day in the years where the weather permits. You know, dry years, you're getting 0. We said, well, pure water expansion, what if they can't get that extra 200 acre feet back in the winter from the base project? And it really is 345 acre feet, a little bit shorter than what's really going to happen. Seaside Basin, what if we begin the in-lieu recharge program in the 6th year? So you have a 5-year period of no recharge, and then you begin 25 years of saving 700 acre feet of pumping. Now, if you remember the last chart with that big green line, that seemed to indicate there's so much extra water that's going in the ground early on that you might not need this in the recharge program. We said, well, what the heck, let's just throw it in, we'll reduce supply. And we said, let's start with no storage. So, you know, a couple, 2,100 acre feet of lower starting point. And then let's make residential demand 3 times the AMBAG growth forecast, because there's a lot of folks who think, oh, housing needs. Mr. Mayor,
I was ready for you.
we're going to have all these people moving in. You've underestimated how many people are going to come. So, okay, fine. We'll do 3 times the population forecast. And what the heck, 2 times the growth forecast in jobs and commercial use. And this is what it looks like. Next slide. Well, a lot less storage accumulates. And in fact, you've eventually hit a point where the growth in demand, the yellow line, is really starting to exceed the annually available water supply. So you really have to rely on the storage, and you're drawing storage down. And by the 27th year, you better have another water project online ready to go. So this is all the district scenario analysis. There's It's going to be contention about whether we're right or someone else is right. I can tell you that we're in a phase 2 of a current PUC proceeding that is meant to address these issues. So maybe they'll be resolved shortly. And we'll talk a little bit about the schedule. Next slide. Next. So July 2024. There may be a decision in this phase 2. It could be August, it could be September. The Public Utilities Commission has the beat of their own drum. So they'll get to it, but we're in the midst of it. There's hearings scheduled in May. There's briefs scheduled for, there's hearings scheduled in March. There's opening briefs in April, and there's reply briefs in May. So that seems to indicate we'll get some sort of decision out before the end of the year. Next. So let's assume a decision does come out, then we, the district, will appeal to Cal-Am to work with us. It'll be great if the PUC sees supply and demand the way we see supply and demand. If they don't, we're not thrown in the towel. So now you're going to have continuing contention over really the role of storage. But let's assume we've got a good answer, then maybe Cal-Am will participate in making that first reach to the State Water Board. If not, then we can't rely on them and the district will do it. Next. Then after that, whether you believe a desal plant is needed or not, it is on a slower path. And our belief is that the nearest and easiest path to lifting the cease and desist order and the moratorium is to get behind Pure Water Monterey expansion and say, look, I may not believe it's 30 years or 50 years, but it sure enough shows enough water to go 10 years or 15 years. As a member of the community who wants housing and jobs, let's get behind Pure Water expansion and sell that to the State Water Board to say there is sufficient substitute water to move forward, lifting the cease and desist order and the moratorium. So that'll be a process that we would engage in, and maybe we flip these two between applying to the state for modification of the order after we work with the community. But I think it's really important that those voices get heard. Next. Then it would be, late 2025. Well, that's Mr. Lindau is going to show you that we're still on schedule, I hope. And the completion date is like the 3rd quarter of 2025, end of the 3rd quarter. So we would want the State Water Board to be ready to act upon completion of the expansion project. And so that's kind of our target as well. Next. And shortly thereafter, if we're successful, if the State Board concurs, then we would ask Cal-Am to file that Tier 1 advice letter. And that should be it. Oh yeah, there's always this. You could expect delays, but I've never been as close to confident as I have now. It was the signing of the water purchase agreement that gave us this project, and that certainty that the project will get complete. And you've seen the track record of this organization operating that project. That guy right there and this whole team. It's a terrific project. And as I said, without the base Pure Water Monterey, we wouldn't have gotten through the cease and desist order and the December 31st, 2021 date. And without the expansion, we're nowhere close to lifting the moratorium. Desal is not around the corner. It's many years away, best case. So that'll be the pitch we make to the chambers and the realtors and all the others to try to get moving on lifting it. But that's the process. Any questions? I'm happy to take them.
Directors, questions? Director Church.
Thank you, Dave. And I'm glad you have worst case scenarios, alternatives up there. AMBAG hasn't been last few years particularly accurate locally on population growth and things. So, there is a lot of unknowns as we look ahead here
Yep.
for the entire state. So it's really good you have that. And there's just a lot of unknowns. There's discussion of a big project over in Olmsted too, which there's 1,300 and who knows what happens on other projects. So, I wonder in terms of the calculations, are you taking Ag Order 4.0 into consideration much at all there in terms of the impact it would have on the expansion?
Yeah, so interestingly, way back in time, one of the, I don't know, Dave, if it was you or if it was me that invented the term off-ramp, but one of the off-ramps was we had hoped to get a regional board waiver for any of the individual farms or growing operations that drained to the Blanco drain. And they really didn't do that. They said, we withhold the right to regulate each one individually, even though it's a single point of discharge to the Salinas River and the base project was going in to grab that water. But on the expansion, I'm not sure I see the connection to the Ag Order in terms of where the source water is coming from. There is a lot of source water in the base project that's affected by that. And if, yes, if they go to, individualized on-site treatment or recycling on their own, it could have an impact. And we've looked at business risk all the time. We've thought about produce wash water up and relocating to Greenfield or Gonzales or something like that. So we've analyzed the risks of a loss of source water. Less important in the base project because of how much water there is or was. But I place my faith in the source water analysis on this team over here at Monterey One Water, and they continue to tell me that there's going to be the water.
Well, I hope your optimism is well placed there. I mean, I do see a connection if Water Resources tells farmers they can't put water into the ditch unless it's clean.
Yep.
Or cleaner. So, I mean, there's definite connection there. I have no idea when Cal-Am is going to begin a project on there, but I did have a conversation with them last week, and they were telling me they have half of their permits at this point or the conditions, I should say, met, and are expecting to start up in the fall of 2025. But just throwing that out.
I've heard that. I've been at lunches where they're not, but that's.
Yeah, I'm not in a position to say they are or they aren't, but it may be many years away.
Yep.
Other directors? Director Craig.
Just wondering if you could go back to your PowerPoint slide with the sharp decline and the red arrow that you pointed out. Wondering, that decline occurred, it looked like it started to occur somewhere around 2011, 2012. I'm wondering if you can attribute that to anything specific, either
Yeah.
state legislation. I know
Nothing
the
in
Pebble
state-
Beach company started using recycled water for their golf courses, but I have no idea if it would make that dramatic of an impact.
No, they started using recycled water in 1994.
Oh, my bad.
And the CSIP project started using recycled water from here in 98, I believe it was. There's 2 points to that. Point number one is we did it first. And point number two is recycled water has been part of the portfolio. We actually had an amusing conversation with the state probably about the time we were trying to get the cease and desist order extended. And they said, well, have you done everything you can on water recycling? We just kind of went like, are you aware of what's been going on? This community's been a leader. So no, in 2002 was when on the peninsula, we passed some very stringent conservation laws on hospitality. So restaurants and hotels. So that started coming in the early 2000s. The 2011 We extended it to all commercial properties and we followed up with audits. But we also changed our rebate structure. We've seen a ton of impact on washing machines.
Mm.
It's like the old style washing machines were 40 gallons. The newest high efficiency clothes washers are about 9. And there's really been a systemic change in, you know, people
Water
buy new
usage.
washing machines, but we also give them $500 to get a high efficiency one. So, so there's not one thing right here. You know, that's a period of about 3 or 4 years. From here to here, I think what you're seeing is the remainder of some of those conservation initiatives, but you're also seeing now what we call hardened, you know, we'll be less responsive to conservation initiatives because we're kind of hitting as far as you can go. I can tell you that we've had 5 tiers. So very, you know, tiered pricing creates basically self-fulfilling conservation. It's economic. Just 3 years ago, it went down to 4 tiers. So we're already moving slightly away here from the overall steeply tiered. So I think it's the base cost of water is so high that we've just kind of leveled out. But there's been no single initiative that resulted in that big drop.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Other questions? Vice Chair Williams?
So first, I want to thank you for coming to our board meeting and presenting this. And you have to be like one of the best presenters. I mean, a lot of the questions that I had as you were going through the slide deck, you answered, and it was a really thoughtful and well-informed presentation. And you did get to the point that I was going to say about the MBAG growth forecast. So I appreciate that acknowledgement. What I would say in return is, I guess I imagine that what might actually happen would be something in between what the projections are, because you took away so many different things in that latter one, where it takes so much from storage, where I don't know if it's going to go that far, but I see where you were going and just showing the variance there. So I appreciated seeing that. I'm wondering, do the numbers that you use take into account the additional wastewater feeding into as a source water for
With
Pure
New
Water
England.
Monterey?
Yeah, it really doesn't. So, you know, for each danger of a little bit of a loss, there's that promise of a little bit of a gain. I should note that for those of you who any of you sit on AMBAG? At its first January meeting, it did a kind of a minor update. So the growth forecast is a 4-year cycle and the housing forecast is an 8-year cycle, and they're slotted now to occur on the same 8-year periods. But they just issued a little memo that was part of their board packet 2 weeks ago. It said their 2-year check. So here we are in 2024, they adopted in 2022, is they're going to see slower growth in both population and jobs. So the forecast that we're using, according to AMBAG, and they're not always perfect, the other not always perfect is we addressed your and Hans's issue about the disconnect between how they allocated housing numbers to the population forecast. Huge disconnect. But anyway, they're already saying that their forecast that we're using is probably too high. And they also say that because baby boomers won't move out of their homes, we're still going to need more housing to meet this odd thing. So the housing numbers still kind of hold, but that we've probably overestimated population and job growth.
And then why wouldn't CalAm certify? Why would they not go take a position to try to get the CDO lifted to allow their customers, or in particular the municipalities, from being able to move forward in developing?
I came here to inform, not advocate today.
Just trying to find the logic.
Yeah. You have to have a worldview that starts with, do you believe in the purpose of storage or not? Now, I can't imagine, take San Francisco. You can't do your water supply planning without thinking about how much water's in Hetch Hetchy. All of the work to date that CalAm has done has ignored carryover storage in ASR and in the Pure Water Monterey expansion case. You add 2,200 acre feet of new water, you don't have 2,200 acre feet of new demand day one. You may not have it for 10 years, you may not have it for 15 years. Those types of things, weather on ASR and housing and demand growth on pure water expansion, drive storage. So you have to factor storage into the equation. Hasn't been done. And in fact, they've used what are called confidence intervals on the ASR portion. And they say, well, we can only predict with 90% accuracy that ASR will do 470 acre feet per year on any given year. And so only count 470 acre feet for ASR. But their own data shows that the average yield for ASR is 1,210 acre feet. So one of those analyses includes storage, one of them ignores storage. And so if you look at the analysis to date, if you discount supply that's available and you overstate demand that's coming, you move that crisis closer to today. And the only way to solve that crisis is with a desalination plant. Well, if that's what your desire is, and you really, 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 really want something, then you may hold out with your desire to have your numbers be the numbers, and you might not want to lift the CDO rider.
I appreciate you speaking so forthright about your response there. You were speaking to the moratorium versus the CDO and it being two different processes. Does the CDO have to precede the effort to lift the moratorium?
Yes. And in fact, in the 2011 decision, the Public Utilities Commission in effect said, we will take your lead, State Water Board. So they are waiting for the State Water Board to act.
Okay. And then last question is, what does the process look like for the Water Management District in regards to the allocation of water supply as it relates to the expansion? Because as you can imagine, we're eager to get going.
So are we. We, at our November board meeting, did speak specifically about two issues. I mentioned one, the disconnect between population by city or jurisdiction and housing. We have some cities who AMBAG has assigned 3 houses per person coming, and some cities that have 3 people per new house. So there's that disconnect. But the other piece of it was, and I don't mean this personally, Supervisor Church, but we're waiting on the county's housing element. Because of things like the Olmsted Road, the packaging of housing along the 68 corridor, a couple of the housing elements that, let's face it, Seaside and Delray Oaks and even Monterey has said, well, we can't rely on your water being there, so we're moving all this housing in our housing element to the old Fort Ord. Well, we don't believe that to be true. If we had if we had water for you, we think that a lot of it would come right back into the regular old Monterey. And, Seaside has Campus Town, and they've got some things that will be served by Marina Coast. So those are legitimate negatives from the CalAm need. But we can't just rely on the fact that because we don't have water, all your housing is going to go to the South Boundary Road. And we can't rely on there being a metropolitan transportation plan that would accommodate the amount of housing that's now being channeled to the 68 corridor, including the county's first, site analysis. So we're waiting on the county's draft plan to come out so we can at least tidy up the mismatch of housing that is in RENA and what is in population in this service territory. And when that happens, we're going to have a technical advisory committee meeting and get going. We did go out to all of the service, so Navy, Army, Presidio, and Coast Guard, and the airport. And their submissions are due March 1st. So the only thing we'll be waiting on is that housing element. So we'll be setting up some times. We hope to have it done by August or September. And there are those jurisdictions who may begin to allocate water for projects that have existing meters while we're trying to solve the other piece.
So the jurisdictions can start having that discussion potentially in early fall around how do we allocate the.
Yeah, it'll get to what we call the Policy Advisory Committee, which means your level at the city, but it'll be at staff level probably beginning mid-March.
Okay.
So, we'll be getting like Kim Cole, a couple city managers, everybody's represented. But they don't have the final authority. Obviously, your council and mayors do.
Thank you.
Any other directors? So Dave, yes, Director Herbino.
Great presentation. I have a question. You mentioned something about the aquifer in terms of even on a drought year. And you get one storm come through and it goes right back up to.
Yeah, I was a little optimistic. It's not one storm, but one rainy period, but yeah.
Right. So in terms of the state, they don't take in that information in terms of, because you guys are obviously can quantify where the levels are in the aquifer. They don't take that into consideration, like on, multi-wet year periods, like let's just say last year, and then this year, if it continued, they don't take that into consideration where the aquifer is and the health of the aquifer.
So there's, our last drought was 2012 through 2015, 16 rather. And at that time, folks like Humboldt County and the water agencies up there firmly put their foot down and said, wait a minute, there's no one size fits all. You have to look at each region individually. And this last go around with the 2 years of the 2 dry years, 21 and 22, there was a little bit of listening to that. So the answer is they're starting to, but they can't make the math necessarily work. That's where they go to what's called the water shortage contingency plan process. And that's where you start off in drought. And so in our case, we define drought as 2 or more years of dry or critically dry based on taking all the years, all 120 that we have data for, and you stratify them. But that water shortage contingency planning process, which is very similar to the scenario analysis where you do start in a 5-year drought, that's their way of getting at it. And so when you do that, if you do it correctly, we would show you start in drought. But all of our droughts that we've had, there's always been a normal year or a wet year or something right before them and right after them. And so what you would show is there's sufficient water on the Carmel River to meet its legal demand every one of those 5 years. So it works its way into the analysis, but there's no policy that calls it out other than plan for a 5-year drought. And so that's where it finds itself.
You would think that they would think a little bit more about sustainability, because if you were able on a wet year to pull that water from the basin, from the Carmel River aquifer, maybe you can leave Seaside Basin alone.
And that's why the first scenario that has so much of a storage buildup, ought to actually satisfy the need for protective water levels on the seaside basin, because that's a secondary issue is what are we doing over and above the management of seaside basin pumping to get protective water levels? And one of the reasons for in lieu is to say, well, we're not going to buy water, but we won't take water we're legally entitled to, and it should have the same effect. It doesn't when you're in extended droughts because you're not getting any recharge, but
Right.
let's assume it's basically the same. Now we're showing that there's quite a bit of water to create protective water levels. The system has other constraints though that we found that you sometimes just can't, on paper it works. Why don't I not take water from the basin? And last year's a very good example. Cal-Am actually left some of their Carmel River water right in the river and took water from banked ASR savings, which my district engineer said, that's kind of like burning your paycheck and hitting your savings account to cover it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't replace that Carmel River water. Just once it's gone, it's gone. So on paper, we said, well, you should have left pure water Monterey water in the ground, taken the river water, get up to your right, then go back and really lay on the pure water Monterey water. But they were taking everything you could deliver to us that didn't go into the reserves the next month. And so they wanted to take it. And we don't know if it's a revenue recognition issue or if it's just the way the system operates issue. But you can do the spreadsheet problem or pull your pencil out and say, should have been able to make this happen. We could have protected the basin here for these months. But it doesn't always work out that way.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So Dave, I appreciate your implicit advocacy for all of us to have a better understanding of statistics and probabilities. So I do appreciate that. What is your agency's belief about the maximum storage capacities of the Carmel and the Seaside basins?
Yeah. Well, the Seaside Basin is somewhat defined based on modeling. And each of the pumpers has an allocation of storage. And it's based on kind of their percentage of allocation. So anyway, Cal-Am's got about 90% of the allocable storage available to it. And that's about 68,000 acre feet in total that it could choose to store in the basin.
Cal-Am share
Cal-Am.
is 68,000. So the total is 75 or something
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I could get you the exact number if you're looking.
Just
And we don't know. I mean, that's,
roughly.
theoretical based on modeling.
And what about the Carmel River Basin?
So Carmel River, the basin or the aquifer under the Carmel River is about 23 to 26,000, which when you consider the average flow of the Carmel, again, average not in a wet year, is about 50. It's about 1/5 the Salinas. I think Salinas discharges on average about 250 acre feet to the ocean. But in a wet year, like just last year, the discharge was in the couple 100,000 range. And so what it does is, we've got one remaining dam, and so that dam has to fill and then spill. Otherwise, it's just a little outlet that is very limited. Once it spills and fills, fills and spills, then it starts inundating and saturating the watershed and the river below it. And then you hit a point where now it's just rolling over the ground because it's saturated. And then it hits the what we call the alluvial aquifer, which is about half the river, the lower half of the river. And that's when it just starts filling up. So if you've filled, spilled, and saturated, then you'll get down to the bottom aquifer, and it can fill up in a week. Depending. But
Okay. If there are no other questions, directors, we need to go out to the public to hear if there are any comments from the public. So we have 3 minutes if anyone from the public wishes to comment on this report from Mr. Stolt? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Stolt. Let's give him a round of applause. And we now move on to the consent agenda. Directors, do you wish to pull any items from consent? We have items A through M. Alpha through Mike.
Just comment on ND.
Go ahead.
It's the low income, and I've made many comments on the past, just noticing that's $200,000, only 12,000's been spent.
And you're urging us to,
I think it's not
Spend.
really effective, the way it's drawn up, but we've had that discussion before and just wanted to put a notice to it.
just a reminder, thank you very much. And we do have that to help out the public, but if the public's not using it, we got to figure out what, yes. All right, anyone from the public wishing to pull any item from the agenda? All right, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Please show unanimous approval. We move on to committee reports. 11A, Budget and Personnel Committee.
Move approval.
Move approval to, or rather, receive the report.
That's correct.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on the motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Please show unanimous approval. We go on to the Recycled Water Committee report.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on the motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Please show unanimous approval. Action item, we get to agenda item 12A to potentially approve a contract with Brown and Caldwell. Staff, please.
Yes. Yes, good evening, Chairman Moore and members of the board. I'm Bob Holden, Principal Engineer. In September 2023, the board approved an agreement related to the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project implemented with CalAm for two tasks, an NPDS permit part and an outfall improvement project part. And that's what we're here for tonight, is for this outfall improvement. So a request for a proposal was advertised October 20th, 2023. We only received one proposal from Brown and Caldwell on December 5th. There were maybe 9 different consultants getting documents, but did not submit, or 8 of them didn't submit. Committee of 5 M1W staff, 1 CalAm employee reviewed the proposal and rated it very highly. So the design includes the project management, coordination, and value engineering meetings, basis of design report for brine mixing structure, gasket seal replacement, that's on the inside of the ocean outfall, diffusers and end gate modifications, and then outfall protection liner. So a liner of the land outfall from the 2 miles from the treatment plant to the ocean. So staff and the Recycled Water Committee asked the board to approve a contract with Brown and Caldwell for a not to exceed amount of $541,872. And I'd be happy to answer questions.
Directors, questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Move approval.
Is there a second? Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on the motion? Okay, hearing none. Any comments from directors? Vice Chair Williamson.
So I would just clarify that there is a fund that has funding from CalAm that has been deposited and is used to cover the cost of this. And then the bulk of this funding is for mostly project management design work, just to clarify for the record.
Right, so CalAm, right, provided us with a check for $750,000 sitting in our account. And the different consultant fees are withdrawn from that. Once it gets down to 200,000, then they will replenish it. And sorry, the second part of your.
The
is
bulk of the funding for the contract is for the project management and design work.
Yes, so it's predominantly this part is design. The previous part that you approved November is for the permit. So NPDS permit.
Thank you. And what,
Thank you, Bob.
just so the public knows, there'll be more steps if we get to completion on this particular thing. What would those additional steps and approvals be that would have to come before the board?
So for this particular project, this is only the preliminary design for the different areas I mentioned. So once we get through that, if everything is looking right, then we come back to you for additional levels of design. For the NPDS permit, there were several areas of uncertainty. Depending on our analysis, there may be need for additional work for that contract that would come back to you for approval.
And then if we get to a point where we have everything we need for an NPDS permit and we have a final design, then we would be seeing potentially a construction contract.
Yes.
One construction contract or multiple ones for different facets of all of this?
Yeah, probably multiple.
Well, there would be a construction and construction management contract, et cetera.
Right.
But would there be multiple construction contracts because there are different
Yes, so
very different.
the liner project is a very different project than the ocean related projects.
Okay. So I just want to get a sense of what might be coming to us going forward.
A lot.
Okay. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on this item, or did I already go out there?
You did. Oh,
Okay.
but there's a hand up now. Oh, but there's down. Oh, that's back up.
Yes, hand is back up. So, all right, Mr. Kelly, go ahead. If staff could let him in and he could unmute himself.
Good evening. Just a question. As it relates to the NPDS, what is the process after that as it relates to the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary and the biological opinion? In phase one, it was obviously a finding of no significant impact, but where does that fit in the process in terms of discharge? Thank you.
Right. Yes. So the sanctuary goes through a federal environmental process of review to approve of what the regional board comes up with for the NPDS permit. We've scheduled a meeting with the regional board and with the sanctuary early March, I think it's the 16th, to preliminarily tell them what we're doing with this NPDS permit, where we think we're headed, and to get feedback from them as to what they are going to want going forward. Does that answer your question, or?
Yeah, I think he's
Yeah.
back with the attendees, but yeah, it sounds like
Okay.
you've answered his question, Mr. Holden. Thank you very much. All right, we'll bring back to the board. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Please show unanimous. Thank you very much. And we move on to informational items. Mr. Lindau, Pure Water Monterey update. Please tell us nothing but good news.
On the ongoing Pure Water Monterey operations, they're now at 13,600 acre feet to date. In fact, mid-March will end the 4th year of continuous operation. So we're getting to the end of our 4th year. January looks like it's going to be another plus 400 acre foot month as December was. So Jose and his crew are grabbing the water when it's available, putting it in the basin, just as the original plan set out. On expansion, remember, we have 2 construction projects. Both those contractors are proceeding accordingly. We're happy with their work so far. I think the next thing you might notice, if you walk your dog or ride your bike up eucalyptus, by late March, the drill rigs should show up for our 2 new deep wells up in the eastern well field. With that, I hand it back to the chair.
Any questions, directors? Vice Chair Williamson.
We were looking at, and I know there's some issues with basically waiting on the state to get back to us in regards to increasing the max that we can withdraw or store beyond the contractual water purchase agreement. Just wondering where we're at with that in regards to this.
Are you referring to that extra 600 that we were
That's correct.
pursuing?
That's correct.
I think as it turned out, the permitting timeline or set of activities for that 600 has now merged with the permitting activities for expansion.
Okay.
So they've kind of been combined.
Okay. Awesome. And when does it look like that part?
So
of
the main engineer, what they call Title 22 engineering report, is actually coming out next week.
Perfect.
Or this week, actually, for an internal review. So we're hot and heavy. Allison and Moore's leading that for M1W.
I think it came out today for review.
Yeah. And so that's an internal review. Once we address all of our comments, all the regulators are on standby. You know, we told them it was coming, will be coming. And then it's a matter of getting them the technical meat and potatoes and then expediting them.
Awesome.
Any other questions?
Sorry, one follow-up. What is that additional acre feet for the expansion? Are we asking for an additional amount because we've tied it with the expansion? What is the 600 is for the base project? What about the expansion? And what is that?
So it kind of gets absorbed, if you will. So
For
it's
both
still
of them.
5750 is our base yield for recharge.
Mhm.
And then the 600 acre feet that we
For
provide
both of
to
them.
Marina Coast for recycled water distribution.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lindau. Good work. Keep up the good work. We appreciate that. You're really helping us out. We go to agenda item 13A, update on tax roll. Mr. Gilpin.
Thank you. I'm going to fill in for Paul this evening. At the January Budget and Personnel Committee meeting, staff received feedback from the committee regarding the implementation plan and the potential opt-out options, specifically around the duration of the opt-out and potentially requiring a required use of non-fee revenue for that opt-out fee and or whether to charge that. Staff's now working with legal counsel, looking at what incorporating those options would require of the district, i.e. we're to charge a fee, would impact us in terms of holding 218 hearings relative to the affected rates, et cetera. Staff's also working with legal. We're finalizing an implementation plan as required by the Health and Safety Code section to implement this. As you know, Monterey One would have to take action, as would each of the member agencies if the member agencies want Monterey One to continue to collect their charges. So we're intending to come back in February to present this to the board or to receive direction as to whether we proceed forward. Staff has plans to meet with member agencies following that. Thanks, Chai. I didn't notice we put this up. So in front of you is kind of a little overview of the process that we'll go over in depth at the February meeting. In order for these rates to be placed on the tax rolls, those rates or charges have to have been approved by 2/3 vote, not the simple majority under 218. The statute requires a 2/3 vote. Our rates at Monterey One, the last time they were approved by a 2/3 vote. I've indicated there in the blue line, that would be the February meeting where this board would confirm whether you want to move forward with the process, whether you want to incorporate opt-out into that process. Following that February meeting, it's anticipated that staff would be meeting with the member agencies regarding the collection process. And as part of that, we'd be explaining to them, just like M1W, all of the agencies would be required to hold noticed public hearings with notices published to all the owners of the APNs where the taxes would be collected. And those reports are presented in a public meeting. People have, just like a 218 hearing, they have the right to come in and object. You get a majority objection, we couldn't pass it. But at that meeting, then this board would be required to approve putting the taxes on the tax rolls by a 2/3 vote. Each of the member agencies wanting M1W to collect their rates and charges would also be required to hold similar hearings, notice public hearings, and approve those resolutions by a 2/3 vote. Staff will be distributing Q&A type information to each of the agencies regarding this process that each one of them would be required to go through. Assuming all that happens in June, then the rates and charges would be placed on the tax rolls by the county in August. So again, we'll go through this in greater depth at the February meeting. Paul just wanted me to give you all a precursor, let you know, make you aware of the constrictions relative to this in case any questions come up from your agencies. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, directors? Or care to wait until February to drink from the fire hose? Okay. Any comments? No, any comments from the public on either staff report? Forgot to ask about.
There are none.
All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to staff reports.
So I'll go ahead, and one of the biggest items that we have is we're doing a big project, about $1 million, to replace the pond liner for SVRP. And SVRP basically shuts down a lot of times, well, every year, depends on November through February, et cetera. And we do winter maintenance, basically. Well, this year is the first year that we we can't deliver water until we have the liner in place. We had some rains when it was starting. I know Jennifer Gonzalez, our engineering manager, has been running the project, but I'd like for Jose to kind of give an update on where we are and how soon we would be able to deliver water. Now, most of the time we don't start up SVRP till about February, mid-February, which is what we had stated, that we wouldn't do this pond liner program unless we were guaranteed that we could be able to deliver water by the 15th of February. So that's still on track, but I'd like Jose to give some more detailed information on it, since this is huge. I mean, this is the first time in its existence that we have replaced it, and actually the grading that they've done, Jose has already seen an improvement because it did rain after they did a portion, and we've already seen less puddling. So go ahead, Jose.
Yes, good evening, Chair Moore and members of the board. Jose Guzman, Monterey One Water Operations Manager. Yeah, like Tammy alluded to, this is a pretty significant project. It's the second in recent years that we've taken on as a capital improvement project for the Salinas Valley Reclamation Facility. That's been in operation since 1998. This one was particularly critical because, as we mentioned, without the pond, we cannot operate that facility. It acts both as a reservoir and provides pressure to the distribution system. Fortunately, the project kicked off January 10th, and based on the contract, the winning bidder and the subs were given 50 days to complete the project. And so we're less than halfway through, and they've actually finished the grading and laid all the liner in, are in the finishing, just doing the finishing touches, welding the plastic liner together, or the HCP liner together. And then around the perimeter of the pond, they trenched out and they used backfill to anchor the edges of the pond. So that's pretty much the step that they're on now, is that final anchoring. Weather permitting, they may wrap that up this week and we'll be well ahead of our February 12th deadline. Given the storms, I don't anticipate starting much earlier than that, but we should be ready to go by then. And again, quite an undertaking. Unfortunately, we don't have any pictures. We'll have some at the next board meeting. That pond is deceivingly big. When it's full, you don't really notice how big it is. And when it's empty and everything's clean, you have a much greater appreciation. But huge success to the engineering team and the contractors on completing this well ahead of schedule.
So Jose, that's the liner project, but there's a few other things that we've got to get wrapped up.
Yeah,
That
there's
actually
some.
might go into the next 2 weeks, but we still anticipate to meet the February 15th go produce, distribute water.
Yeah, there's the gate that provides water into the pond, the inlet gate. They're called dog ears. It's like bracing that helps the gate guide up and down. And the rotork had some failures during this past season. So we're waiting on, the rotork showed up, but they're still fabricating the nut that makes the gate go up and down. And then there's the guides that are probably in the next 2 weeks, we'll get those. And then another significant project is we replaced the ACH, the polymer dosing skid with the new skid. That project is undergoing startup this week. And then once the installation is complete, we'll do the wiring and piping internally, and then a rep will come out and help with the startup of that, because it's going from pumps and a drive to all-in-one skid with the pumps, back pressure regulators and drives all on one skid. So once we wrap those up, we're fairly confident that we'll be ready to go by mid-February.
Any
Does anybody
questions?
have any questions for Jose?
Yeah.
Director Carbone?
Or me?
What is the capacity of the liner pond, the project, the pond?
Capacity is what the
Of
pond
water.
holds?
Yeah, 80.
Oh, it's 80 acre feet, so roughly
Oh.
like 29 million gallons.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And since they did grading on the pond, Jose, did we get a slight increase in the capacity?
Not
Yeah.
much. So there was a lot of dips and kind of unevenness because when the pond was first put into service, there's actually a layer of sand and rock at the bottom. So we removed those pretty soon after the commissioning of the project. And then now what they did is they just graded everything to center, and it was only a 1% grade. So they didn't have to bring in or move any sand out. They just kind of, it's almost like they just combed it. And then one of the challenges we had is after removing the sand, the drain grading was actually a high point because we took off about 1 foot of sand. So they lowered that. So it should make the sweeping and cleaning much easier for future seasons.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Any other staff
That
reports?
was the only staff report I had. Fred, do you have one?
Yeah, just one thing. So we were notified again, as you know, we bring the budget, each year to the board. And we were notified today, actually, that we won our award again for both our capital and operating budget. So that's all I had.
He won't talk about it, but we scored really high on that. So
Yeah.
kudos to Fred and his team. Just a couple things we talked about at the BPC meeting. We've done tours for the city of Reno. They're starting up a similar project up in that area. One of the issues that they don't have is the ocean outfall. So they're going to have to use a different method of treatment, but they're really excited to maybe starting to provide a sustainable water supply for their community. So kind of a feather to the cap. They've been down like 2 or 3 times now. We've seen different groups from Reno, and this was like the regulator group that came down. And so we took them around and showed them. And so that was a good tour. Rachel this past week hosted Morro Bay. They're in this space looking for replenishment. And she hosted Director Cronin on Friday as well.
Yes, and his alternate, right?
And the alternate. Been a little active on the advocacy front. Rachel and Johanna went to the chamber lunch when Marianne was there. We've also submitted a letter of support to Senator Padilla. They're trying to solidify funding for low-income wastewater fund. It's been in temporary. allocation, and we're trying to advocate for a more permanent funding source for that. And we've also done some state advocacy in regards to having our state agencies support a renewable energy project that will be a component of a federal grant. And so working with different state agencies to make sure that some type of renewable energy component is available for some EPA money coming down soon. And it's a large pool of funds that will try to compete against some of the big boys for, and hopefully our renewable energy project will be that. And one last thing, we're really trying to put the finishing touches up on a grant agreement for the Pure Water Monterey expansion. We've been chasing this for over 2 years, and Mr. Gilpin signed the legal opinion last week and submitted the paperwork, so it's routing and state. So hopefully we'll have that wrapped up very, very soon. That's it.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Any other staff reports?
No
No, I
staff
hadn't.
report?
No, no.
We're good.
Okey doke. We go on to agenda item 15, which is board member comments. Board member comments. Director Craig.
Just a comment, we'd had some pretty extensive conversations about the weighted vote, and our homework was to go out to each, excuse me.
God bless you.
I promise I'm healthy. I apologize. That's week 6 of a cough. We talked about the weighted votes, and the homework was for each of us to go to our respective agencies and ask to agendize it for discussion. And so I know General Manager Shudo had said that he was aiming for January. So I just respectfully ask that either you connect with Paul and let him know the outcome of those discussions, or you agendize it in your own respective member agencies here. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Craig, and you're preempting one of my comments, but I'll give it in a moment. Any other directors? Okay, I do have 3 things. Just want to announce who has very nicely volunteered to serve on the nominating committee, and that is Director Church chairing the committee, and Director Smith and Director Garcia Arizola. As usual, each year we alternate the membership of that committee in the sense of 2 from the peninsula or 2 from the valley. So I guess it's 1 from the valley and 2 from the peninsula this year, and next year it'll be 2 from the valley and 1 from the peninsula. So thank you very much for volunteering. Secondly, a little less than a year ago, Chai tried to get us together on a date for some strategic planning, and we haven't done that in quite a while. So I'm going to ask her to go out again to you to see if we can get some time when all of us, or nearly all of us, can get together and spend maybe half a day doing some thinking about strategic planning for our agency. We're not doing bad, but I think part of our responsibility is to look to the future and talk about those things and help provide staff with appropriate guidance. So please, when Chai reaches out to you with some alternate dates, whether they're Saturdays, Sundays, weeknights, I promise she won't suggest we meet at 3 a.m. anywhere. But please respond, and let's see if we can get everyone together to have a strategic planning session early this year. And then lastly, to Director Craig's response. So we had been in discussions with Paul, who sets our agendas, talking about when can we bring a discussion about opening the JPA, particularly with respect to weighted vote, forward. And as Director Craig pointed out, we've asked if all of your respective councils and boards would weigh in on whether or not you want to see that discussion brought forward and opened. We haven't heard back from very many of our agency boards, and I understand you have probably in many cases fairly full agendas and lots of things to do that may take more immediate priority. But if we're going to have that discussion, we probably need to hear from everybody. It doesn't seem to be we would get very far if we've only heard from half of our agencies. So just encourage you to try and get that discussion done. And please let staff know what you're thinking the schedule is when you might be able to get that done, because that probably ought to inform when we talk about it collectively, if that makes sense. So those are my comments. Thank you very much. We go to agenda item 16, public comment on closed session item. Anyone wishing to address the board on matters appearing on the closed session may do so at this time. Please limit your comment to 3 minutes or less. Anyone? All right, how about we take a 5-minute break before we reconvene in closed session? At 7:56, no action was taken on closed session.
I'm not sure the recording picked us up, but we adjourned from closed session at 7:56. As indicated, there's no reportable action.
Yeah.
Chair Moore, I turn it over to you.
And we stand adjourned. Thank you.